like to call this meeting of the Sutter Butte Flood Control Agency to order. First item of business is roll call, please.
Jeff Stevens.
Here.
Bruce Johnson. Todd Kimmelshoe.
Here.
Bo Shepherd. Mark Boomgarden.
Here.
Dave Shaw. Charlie Hoppin. Gary Marler. Mike Morris. And Carm Baines.
Present.
Is that it? Okay. We're all good with the mics? All right. Next order of business is the Pledge of Allegiance, and I would like Director Stevens to please lead us in the pledge.
Pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you.
Thank you. Minutes. All right. Okay, I'm looking at minutes. I don't have a current agenda. I picked up the wrong pack. Anybody else? Thank you, sir. Okay. Public comment. Members of the public will be allowed to address the Sutter Butte Flood Control Agency's Board of Directors on items of interest to the public that are within the subject matter jurisdiction of the board. Any member of the board, any member of the audience who may wish to bring a matter before the board that has not been placed on the agenda may do so at this time. However, state law provides that no action may be taken on any item not appearing on the posted agenda. Right. Do we have any public comment from anybody? Okay, seeing none. Consent calendar. Consent calendar groups together those items which are considered non-controversial or for which prior policy direction has been given to staff and that require only routine action by the board. The chair will advise the audience that the matters may be adopted in total by one motion. However, the board may, at its option or upon request of a member of the public, consider any matter separately.
Through the chair.
Yes, please.
Move to approve the consent calendar.
Second. I have a motion by Director Baines and a second by Director Morris. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, consent calendar is approved unanimously. Information and possible approval items. Item number 2, presentation from Jennifer Fromm from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. And I imagine, Mr. Bissett, you probably want to do a bit of an introduction.
I do. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So it's our pleasure to have Miss Jenny Fromm with the U.S. Army Corps at our board meeting today. She's going to give the board a presentation, an overview of the New Bullets Bar Dam and Oroville Dam Water Control Manual updates. Jenny is the project manager for that effort on behalf of the Corps. Our agency, myself and Chris Fritz, we're participating in that process. It started several years ago, and Jenny's going to provide a good briefing here to the board, and then we can turn it over to any questions after. So with that said, Jenny?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me today. I'm excited to talk to you about water control manuals because I get excited about water control manuals. Let me make sure I got the clicker here. My name is Jenny Fromm. I'm the chief of the water management section at the Sacramento District. I'm also the technical lead for the New Bullets Bar and Oroville Water Control Manual updates. So it buzzes when you click on it too. That's fun. So today I'm going to talk about some big picture items, and then I'm going to get into some details about the New Bullets Bar and Oroville Water Control Manual updates. So where the Corps gets their authority for flood control, water control manual overview, what the water control manual update process looks like, and the next steps in the New Bullets Bar and Oroville Water Control Manual updates, and then a time for questions. So So the Corps gets their authority for the flood control from Flood Control Act of 1944, which states that the Corps should prescribe the rules and regulations in the interest of flood control. And the project owner, whether that's the Corps of Engineers or another owner, which we call Section 7 projects, if someone else owns and operates that project, is responsible for the real-time implementation of the water control plan, but the Corps has the authority to determine the flood control releases in that space. And one thing to note in Sacramento district, because other districts throughout the country are a little different, like the Corps, even at Corps projects, only oversees the flood control space, period, at Corps projects and at Section 7 projects. Other districts throughout the country, if it's a Corps project, the Corps will look at the conservation space as well, and we do not do that in Sacramento. So basics of water management, the goal and the objectives of water management is to operate to the authorized purposes and laws, maintain the structural and operational integrity, avoid risks to public health, safety, life, and property. And the Corps is responsible for water management at Corps projects, but I did have that distinction I just discussed about in Sacramento district. But the Corps is also responsible for prescribing the rules for flood control and at non-Corps projects, what we call Section 7. Oroville and New Lords Bar, because they're owned by other agencies, are both Section 7 projects. In that, there's special acts of Congress. We look at FERC conditions, other agreements, et cetera. Like the goal is we oversee the flood control operations and we write those rules and regulations, but we want to make sure that those are not in direct conflict with any other rules and regulations. So a brief overview of all the projects we oversee for flood control operations in Sacramento district is here. The district itself covers 8 states, but we have flood control projects in California, Utah, and Colorado. And then you'll see over here towards the coast, clickers don't work with TVs anymore. You do see some outline outside of the district. We also do the data management for the San Francisco district. So you'll see those 3 projects outside of the district boundaries. So how we operate for flood control regulations is in a water control manual. And what is a water control manual? It's essentially the guiding document that specifies how the Corps operates within the flood control space. It provides that operational instruction so personnel know how to manage the reservoir, but then they also know how to manage the reservoir if an emergency situation happens. It prevents loss of institutional knowledge. So as we retire or do other things, our successors know what operations we use and what data we use. Ensures unbiased operations and that the mission's priorities are transparent to the public. And it's sometimes called a reservoir regulation manual. You'll see that with some of the older documents, which a lot of them are older documents. Doesn't mean that they're not great, but they could be improved. And really the meat and the potatoes in those when it comes to the reservoir operations are the standing instructions to the dam operators. We'll usually call that Appendix A because it's usually Appendix A. The water control diagram itself and the emergency spillway release diagram, which I'll go through what those 2 things are here in a second. So there are multiple types of water control manual updates. So when you hear that the Corps is updating the water control manual, it's also important to know what type of update is that going to be. So an administrative update, you're updating the points of contact, updating any activities that have happened in that watershed, any hydrology that needs to be added to the period of record. So say your water control manual is from 1984 and it's now 2025, you're gonna update that hydrology to probably through 2024. And also updating to any core standards. So then there's the comprehensive update, and that's when we're doing all the things we did in an administrative update, but we're also revising the water control plan / the operations. And then there's a construction update, which includes all the things in the administrative update. It includes any of those structural changes that you've seen at that facility, but it may or may not, depending on the appropriation and the authorization, go back to the existing water control plan, or it may update the water control plan itself. Examples of that would be when the JFP spillway was added at Folsom, that in itself changed the operations because that structure added some additional components where the operations would be different. But at Isabella, when we added that new spillway, the appropriation and authorization said do not change the operations, even though the spillway is different. So some regulations that we use when we're updating water control manuals, I'm not going to go through each one of these here, but they're here more as a reference. I've highlighted ER 8156 because that details preparation of water control manuals, and it really does go through each section, like this section should have this information, this section should have this information. It was recently updated in 2018. And so that's kind of the main one when it comes to like what the text should say, but we look at all these other regulations in order to figure out like what the operation should be updated to and any other things. So what's in a water control manual? Here I've listed the chapters. There's approximately 9 chapters with some additional appendices depending on the project. And the meat and the potatoes here is the water control plan itself, which is in chapter 7. But you'll also see like there's history, description of the project, the authorizations, the watershed characteristics, how the data is calculated, the effects of the water control plan, and then the water control management itself. So some terminology that we throw around, and sometimes it can get a little confusing because sometimes they all start with water management or water control. So there's the water control manual, which we talked about, which has the description, the history, the information, and it contains the water control plan, which is essentially the operations. And then within the water control plan, there's a graphical representation of that plan called the water control diagram. So the diagram is going to show you how much flood space you need on any given day and the calculations on what you need in order to calculate that amount of flood space. And I'll go through an example. So another way to say the water control plan is a rule curve. So if you hear rule curve, that's also signifying like where the distinction is between flood control and conservation. So here's a really simplified picture of a reservoir. You have the top of the dam, the surcharge pool, a spillway crest, you have a flood pool in the middle, the conservation pool, and an outlet, not to scale, not representing any specific dam we have in our portfolio. But then how that correlates to essentially 2 pieces of paper, so because that's what a water control diagram is, it's a piece of paper, is you'll see that trapezoidal shape where you'll see the fall drawdown, and these dates are arbitrary, and then the spring refill. And then you'll also see a green shaded area for the emergency spillway release diagram. So if you have a structure that has a gated spillway, Oroville, New Bullards Bar, Folsom as an example, you'll have a separate diagram on how to operate those gates in an emergency situation. So typically what you're gonna see on a water control diagram is you'll see the graphical representation itself. Your y-axis is gonna be your either storage in acre feet, and probably on the other side, you're gonna see space in acre feet. The x-axis is going to be the dates. Typically, it'll start in the summer and go through the next summer, so that way you'll see that trapezoidal shape, and you'll have the fall drawdown. It depends on the project. Sometimes they start in October, sometimes they start in September, and typically that means towards the end of November/December, depending on the project, you'll need that full flood control reservoir for the winter months. And then you'll have a spring refill, in most cases starting in February. And then if you have a snowmelt component that directly affects the water control operations, then you'll have a conditional snowmelt space. Now, that doesn't mean that every reservoir that has snow in their watershed is gonna have a conditional space. Typically, you're gonna see that conditional space in the San Joaquin, where you have really big reservoirs, but really small channel capacities. So you have to be thinking 1, 2, 3, 4 months in advance, thinking about the existing irrigation demands, how much space you have and how much snow is in the mountains, and the channel capacity. So if you need to start releasing in March, April to get ahead of that big snowpack, you can do so. We did that in 2023. So other things you're gonna see on a water control diagram is how to calculate the top of conservation calculation. And that tells you on any given day, because we do this calculation every single day, how much flood space do you need on that given day? And depending on the project, you have multiple things that go into it. Basin wetness, Oroville is an example of looking at basin wetness. Upstream credit storage, where some projects, they'll get extra credit, so to speak, and they don't need as much flood space in their flood control reservoir if the upstream reservoirs have space available. Snow, we talked about that a little bit already, and irrigation demand, we also talked about that already. It'll also tell you what the downstream control location and release limit are. It'll also tell you how fast or slow you can increase or decrease those flood control releases in a given period of time, and then any other special rules of note for that particular project. So here's an example of Oroville in 2023. This is a plot that's shown on our public website. We have these for every single one of our projects that we oversee for flood control operations. At the top, you'll see blue lines coming down. That represents the precipitation. One thing to note, if you're looking at these and comparing years, that y-axis will adjust. So while it might look like a good amount of rain for here, because it was in 2023, but if you compare that to 2021 per se, it might graphically look the same, but the y-axis is totally different. So you got to make sure you're paying attention to that if you're doing comparison between years. The y-axis on the very bottom with inflow and outflow also does the same. So if you're doing a comparison between years, it might graphically look very similar, but it might not be. So pay attention to that y-axis. But the y-axis in the middle, when we're looking at the actual reservoir storage itself, it does not adjust. We'll see that top line at the top, for gross pool, that indicates like the legal limit for that particular reservoir. And then you'll see the gray space, which is the conservation space. And the white space that's in between the gray space and the gross pool, that represents the flood control space. You'll see in March of that year where the blue line, which represents the storage on that given day, is in the flood space, and that's when we're doing flood control releases. Similar plot for New Bullard's Bar. They, at New Bullard's Bar, don't have any special calculation that gets done every single day. It's literally just a trapezoid, and so you'll always see the trapezoid here. You'll see in March that the reservoir got encroached slightly, and then flood releases were done at that time. So, simplified way to look at how we update water control manuals. So we're looking at updating the water control plan itself. Update is approximately a 4 to 5 year process. And that ensures that we're looking at life, property, all the legal requirements. We're looking at the NEPA process. That's usually the long lead item in this thing. We're doing stakeholder and public coordination. We're looking at the hydrology as well as developing alternatives to look at different types of operations. We're doing a NEPA analysis. So depending on the effects, and I'm not a NEPA professional, I do know enough about NEPA to be dangerous though. So it's 1 year for an environmental assessment and 2 years for an environmental impact statement. Then we have the water control manual preparation itself. And then we also prepare an engineering report that goes with that. So essentially, the water control manual is the appendices to our engineering report that details all the things that we looked at when we updated this water control manual. And then a large chunk of the process is actually reviewing. So we have a district review, agency technical review, other people review. We have headquarters look at it from a legal perspective. Like all the reviews happen to make sure all the I's are dotted and all the T's are crossed. So that's why it takes a long time. There's a lot of engineering that goes into it. You got to make sure you're looking at all the rules and authorities and authorizations, make sure you're looking at all the NEPA impacts, and also reviewing it to make sure all the I's are dotted and T's are crossed. So I'm not going to go through this, but there's a whole flow chart on how this happens. But essentially, I love it. It's color-coded. I love color-coding things. It's showing you, we got to look at NEPA. We got to look at the regulations. We got to look at how do we actually update water control manuals. And in certain situations, we also got to look at endangered species. So with New Bullard's Bar in Oroville, since they share a control point, we're doing these projects together. And they do have the benefit of being involved with the FURO pilot study. So we have some potential alternatives where we've started looking at those and those might be the ones we put forward. So when we looked at things from a NEPA perspective too. We have not started NEPA. So when I say that, don't be like, you started NEPA without me. That's not true. So we prepared an environmental compliance management plan. We prepared an environmental modeling plan, which tells us which models we need to use to look at the impacts, because they're going to be different on the Yuba River and the Feather River. We developed the no action and future without project action. And then we also did some initial modeling for the environmentals in order to be prepared to start NEPA. So we are here. We're getting ready to start NEPA. And we thought we would have started NEPA already by this point, but we ran into a couple things. One, NEPA regulations changed about a month ago, and 2, we needed some contracting help, and so we're working on getting that contract awarded. And then from that, the next steps will be, and I have another slide that goes into a smidge more detail about this, updating the water control manual, having a draft NEPA document, public review and comment, and then that approval process that we talked about earlier. So here's essentially where we are right now. I have this public scoping period, but then I found out like 2 days ago, I don't know if scoping is included still in NEPA, so that part might not be valid, but we do plan to start NEPA later this year, early 2026. That's gonna help correspond with this contract that we're awarding and also getting our ducks in a row with these new NEPA regulations. You'll have a draft water control manual to review for both projects, as well as a draft NEPA document to review for both projects approximately 6 months later. And then depending on the type of environmental analysis we're doing, with an environmental assessment, which is EA, it's 30 days, and with an environmental impact statement, it's 45 days. And then based on public comment review, responding to those comments, then we will have a final NEPA document, but it depends on the comments. And so I don't have a date on that. But we're still on track for having 2 updated water control manuals, one for New Bullards Bar and one for Oroville, around mid-2027. And that's always been the schedule. And just a heads up on the other water control manuals we're working on within the district. I made this map the other day, and because I thought this was better than a list. I had a list previously. So construction, we talked about what a construction update would look like with Folsom. They're doing a dam raise there, so that's different than what was done in 2019. Schaefer, they raised the spillway and widened it. And Isabella, that we're working on finalizing that water control manual with the new spillway. That should be done pretty soon. Administrative update, the Merced Stream Group, Burns, Bear, Owens, and Mariposa in the San Joaquin. They don't have operational gates. They're just a dam that has a gate that's wide open at all times. So we're just doing that administrative update there. We've talked about Oroville and New Bullards Bars, the Furo pilot study. And then we're doing additional comprehensive updates for Buchanan and Hidden, which is in the San Joaquin, Black Butte, which is in the Sacramento, and then in the Truckee Basin, that's just one water control manual for all 4 of those projects. New Hogan in the San Joaquin, Pine Flat and Terminus in the Tulare, and then of our projects in Utah and Colorado, the Weber Basin, which is in Utah near Salt Lake City, Jordanelle, which is also near Salt Lake City, and then Blue Mesa, which is in Colorado. So I covered a lot today. And here is a QR code for our New Bullards Bar and Oroville public website, which will get more active as we get closer to the NEPA process and actually start the NEPA process. We did have an informational meeting in October, and so the information from that meeting is on this website. So that QR code goes to the website, but then also at the bottom, there's an email address that goes to myself, the project manager, the environmental lead, and also the public affairs office. So that way you ensure that if you do have a question, we're able to respond quickly. So that is all I have for you today. So I'm available for questions. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for the presentation. I know some of our board members have questions, so we'll start with Mr. Hoppen.
Jenny, I'm a representative of Levy District 1, and maybe I'm not smart enough to understand all you said, but it seems like the manual deals with a reservoir and the structure that confines it and how you operate that to maintain the water supply and the integrity of the structure. But I don't understand how that interfaces with the responsibilities you have downstream for areas like our levee district and flood control and erosion downstream from the structure. I don't know how far this manual affects things downstream. If you could explain that in some detail, I'd really appreciate it.
Sure. So the manual itself basically goes into how do you operate the dam itself. It looks at your objective flow location. So, for Oroville and New Bullards Bar, we're looking at, the direct releases from each project, because that's what the manual says. And then we're also looking at Marysville, where the confluence comes in. Depending on other projects, you're looking at different places downstream. So the Corps is not responsible for maintaining that channel or making sure that the levees are being maintained unless it's specifically called out with our authority, and it's not. But we're having conversations in real time with folks that are on the ground. So if there's an issue downstream and we want to release, I'm going to make up numbers, if we want to release 60,000 CFS out of Oroville, but there's a potential issue downstream and that at that time, we would adjust if we need to, depending on what that issue is. I don't know if that fully answered your question, but I mean, it's not in a bubble, even though the manual itself is just about the dam.
Other questions?
Yeah, Jenny, thanks for being here. My name's Todd Kimmelshoe. I'm a county supervisor up in Butte County. And what we are most concerned about in Butte County, and maybe on down into Sutter County, is the integrity of the dam, the safety of the dam, the safety of our citizens. We see Lake Oroville as more of a flood protection device than it is a water delivery device. Now, I understand other parts of the state may see that differently. But how do you correlate or work with those two issues? I mean, obviously we want a reservoir that's full of water, but also if there's a catastrophic event and a lot of snow melts and it comes down, and how do you coincide with both those issues?
Yeah, and it's definitely a balancing act. So when we're doing the engineering analysis, we're looking at flood control first, but we're also looking at potentially there might be some secondary benefits for the other authorizations. But in the manual itself, it only has the flood control rules. It does not have any of the rules for water supply or the other authorizations.
So what you're saying is the top priority of the manual and the authorization of the manual is for flood protection, not for water delivery.
Correct.
Okay. And then one other question, and I don't know if you have anything to do with the integrity of the dam and the fitness of the dam, but we've heard recently that maybe it is not at the level that it should be as far as safety. At the highest level, I believe is satisfactory, and maybe it's not at the highest level of where it is maintenance-wise. Is that correct?
Dam safety oversight is with the project owner. So like if it's a core project, then we have a dam safety section that oversees the dam safety of our project. Since DWR owns Oroville, they're the ones that oversees that. So I don't know the answer.
Okay, but you would be at for instance, Lake Shasta.
No, because Bureau of
That's a core.
Reclamation owns.
Oh, Bureau of Reclamation owns that one. Okay.
Correct.
All right. So, okay, well, thank you
You're welcome.
for that. And I know there's probably people in the audience, but yeah.
Chair. So, thank you for being here, Bo Shepherd from the city of Big. I'm curious, when you talk about capacity, is that taking into account the sediment buildup from the wildfires
It's,
behind the dam?
oh, you're talking about behind the dam? Okay, because I was wondering if you were talking about behind the dam or in the channel. If we've done a recent, what we call a sediment survey, or and we're updating the new area capacity table, then that information will be taken into account. DWR recently updated their area capacity table in June, and so we have that information both on our core website, and we're incorporating that into the water control manual. Other projects, if they don't have an updated area capacity table, we're not making any assumptions about how much sediment is in the reservoir. We only do that if we have a new study showing like we took these measurements, both, and then the new way to do it is like you fly the LiDAR and then you also do it with bathymetry studies, you can get the underwater information. The manual itself is not going to go into like the amount of staff you need at each facility. But if you're asking, is that what you're asking, or are you asking something else? Okay. But it will tell you like, here's what you need to do, folks that are on the ground, dam tenders, maintenance staff, et cetera.
You're the chair.
You're welcome.
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you. So if I'm understanding right, the Army Corps comes up with the manual, and then like with Oroville, they turn it over to DWR so they can implement the strategies and everything. Am I understanding right?
We write the water control manual at the core, but then we're also doing that with input from DWR and Yuba Water for New Bullards Bar. And then we actually work on real-time operations together. There is a program that got established after the 97 flood called the Forecast Coordinated Operations Program, where DWR, Yuba Water, the Corps, the National Weather Service, and other agencies, we make sure to communicate, in real-time operations as well as non-real-time operations. We have a functional exercise every year, usually in October, and we're making sure like the forecast data that is there and is available is the latest and greatest. So like the manual's written by the Corps, DWR, will sign it because there's a signature spot for both the Corps general and then DWR, and then like we oversee the flood control operations, but we're having communications in real time.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Go ahead, Director Kimmel.
Okay, one more question from me. When was the last time the manual was updated?
I might get them wrong. One of them is 1970 and one of them is 1972. One, New Lord's Barn, Orville. I don't remember off the top of my head.
So it's been quite some time.
Correct. I might have, I might
so-
have screenshots.
I think obviously a lot of things have changed, and one thing that seems to have changed is probably the climate change. At what point do you consider climate change when you are redoing the manual?
I thought I turned my phone off. My apologies for it ringing. Climate change is not my lane. Also, with this new administration, we can't use those words, but we are looking at those things when we're doing our study. The Department of Water Resources, they actually have a really robust view of looking at climate change, but the Corps' view on that is not as detailed. So I'm not actually the best person to answer that question, but I can get more details if you would like that.
Director Morris.
Thank you. I'm Mike from LD9. I'm right up above LD1. And we were talking a little bit ago about the settlement on the water side of the dam. What about the settlement measurements or anything in the river itself? Does anything come into act on that or play on that?
That would be the responsibility of others and not the Corps. So depending on which channel, it might be the county, it might be the city, it might be.
Would that go into calculations upon how much water you guys are letting out?
It would, but like has there been a recent new study on that? Like at this moment, we're not changing the objective flow locations for New Lord's Barn and Orville. So, but if there is some issues in the channel, like we definitely want to hear what those are.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else from the board? Go ahead, please.
He already has it. So you're welcome to it.
Go ahead, Michael.
Chairman, thank you. Jenny, thank you so much for your presentation. I just have one, hopefully simple question. I was wondering, there's been a lot of budget cuts federally. How's your program funded? Are you guys good for the schedule that you just presented?
For the water control manuals for New Lord's Barn, Orville, we are. We needed some additional funding, and we are slated to get that at the beginning of FY27, and that's the last bit we need. So I don't see any concerns with funding for these two water control manual updates.
Perfect. Thank you.
And I did look at my screenshot. Orville's update was in 1970. That means New Lord's Bar was 1972.
At this point, we have a bit of time allocated for any public questions or comments. Is there anybody in the public that would like to address the board on this presentation? All right. Seeing none. Jenny, thank you so much for the very thorough and detailed description and of the project, and appreciate the PowerPoint as well. Thank you.
You're welcome. And if you have any further questions, just let me know.
Will do. All right, moving along, we'll go to item number 3, the presentation and file of the monthly financial report.
All right, Sean's going to present that one, and let's see if he gets a round of applause when he's done.
That was a tough act to follow. Very good. So this presentation covers just financials through the end of June of this current year. Keep in mind, too, that this is the end of the fiscal year, although not the end of accounting for the fiscal year. We're currently in a accrual period, and final financials for 24-25 should be presented, I guess officially after the audit. So working capital, the end of June was about 25 million. Estimated working capital about 27.5 million. Revenue, we had received all the revenue that we had budgeted for the fiscal year. 750,000 for the operating fund, and for the capital fund, about 8.9 million. Although including both what we have received and pending, about 12.4 million. That difference in what is effectively what we have pending, about 3.5 million, which is further broken down here. Currently pending, in July, we wound up receiving about 66,000 in additional assessment revenue, and about 3.4 million in capital payments. Of those capital payments, the biggest one is, in which we're anticipating to receive very soon, should be about 2.6 million for our partial retention release on the UFR grant. For estimated expenditures, about 4.6 million through June, and paid expenditures, and estimated expenditures to date about 5.1 million. In financing, we have a debt service payment due in October, which we had received the most recent invoice from U.S. Bank on, about 1.5 million for the 2013 bond issue, and I'm sorry, this is actually a misprint. The second one is the 2013 series issue. The first one is the 2015 issue for 1.5 million, and the second one is the 2.4 million. So the combined total in debt service, about 3.9 million. And we're processing that payment currently. So just various financial activities going forward into the current month and into the future here. Just processing reimbursement packages with the state. And we've got a few closeouts on various grants. RFMP Round 4, CNRA is set to close out in September. And then one remaining CFW grant, our veg planning grant, which also is currently underway for closeout. Additional activities include are set to begin our audit for 24-25, which will start kind of laying the groundwork for that in September. And then the assessment roll for 25-26 has been, Wildan has disseminated out to constituents. So just open up for questions.
Any questions for Sean? Hearing none. Round of applause. Well done. All right. Item number 4, presentation and file of the program and project update, Mr. Bissett.
Yes, Mr. Chairman and members of the board, it's good to see you all. We took last month off, and I hope you all enjoyed that. Even though we didn't have a board meeting, we have a lot of activities that I want to brief the board on. So we got all our projects are moving forward. Let's start with the Tudor Flood Risk Reduction Project. We're in active construction. That's the 1.6-mile levee repair down along the Feather River near the Highway 99 bridge. We have cutoff wall construction occurring right now, and we also have levee regrade. So our contractor's now starting to build the levee back up where the cutoff wall was already installed. Our contractors work in 10+ hour work days, 6 days a week. Nordic is doing a fantastic job out there, so we're real pleased with their work so far. We do have one issue with the 20-inch pressure pipe that we've since removed, and we'll be working with the landowner, Odysseus Farms, to reinstall that pipe next year. We will have a closed session matter on that item today. So we're in year 1 of construction. Our contractor will be finishing up cutoff wall construction later this month, maybe into early September. At the same time, rebuilding the levee back up, and we'll have the levee reconstructed prior to flood season. So we'll have everything buttoned up prior to the end of October. And then the contractor will work through the winter just on the temporary bypass pumps that are in place in lieu of that 20-inch pressure pipe. And then we'll come back next season after flood season and install the new pipes. So that's where we're at on Tudor flood risk reduction. Next slide, please. On our Sutter Bypass East Levee Repair Project, that's the 5.2 mile levee repair. We're at about a 90% design stage now, so we've submitted those plans for review to our independent panel of experts, the Army Corps, and also the state Department of Water Resources. So we're getting review comments, and our design team will be working on, addressing those comments and delivering 100% set of bid documents later this year. We're also working with DWR on a FEMA hazard mitigation grant. That's in lieu of the BRIC grant that we were successful at, but that the administration had decided to terminate that program. So we're pivoting over to the HMGP. So we'll be submitting a pre-app next month and then working with Cal OES and DWR to submit the full application at the timeline needed. We're also working with Calpine and DWR. We're going to have a meeting later this month to talk about advancing additional designs and permitting on the remainder of the Sutter Bypass East levee. So we want to continue with those much-needed public safety improvements. On City of Orrville levee repair, we're still waiting on the Army Corps' levee safety inspection report, They performed that inspection in May, and they've been working on the report. So we're hoping to get it this month. That's when we were informed that we would receive that for our review. So as soon as I get it, I'll inform the board about that. We're also working with the Army Corps project manager in San Francisco on the potential to do a feasibility study under their continuing authorities program. We're just heard that that program may not have gotten the funding that they were hoping for, so we're trying to see if that's still a viable option to pursue. And also looking at other state opportunities for funding to advance a levee safety project for the city of Orrville. So we're still doing everything we can to assist the city. On the Sutter Basin Flood Risk Reduction Project, or Flood Risk Management Project, the Army Corps project, the good news there, in this, I wrote these slides about a week or so ago, the PPA amendment has been approved by the ASA's office. So the Assistant Secretary of the Army approved the project partnership amendment. That allows for the credit transfer from the Sutter Basin project, our project, to the SAJAFCA project. So we're going to work with the Central Valley Board to formally approve that PPA amendment so that all parties can sign. And that should happen next month. That's what we're planning on. Also working with the Army Corps on the reappraisals for 21 properties that Sabufka had acquired under the Feather River West Levee program. The Corps has determined that they have to do some reappraisals on some properties, certain acquisitions, because we acquired more property or more rights than what the Corps would have under their own authority. So it does trigger the need for these reappraisals. So we have a meeting set up for tomorrow to figure that out and who's going to do what and how we can deliver this so we can button up that final accounting of the project. Next slide, please. On our Orrville Wildlife Area, Robinson's Riffle project, we're at a 65% design level. We're coordinating closely with our state partners, CDFW and DWR. So they're doing some reviews of those plans now. We're pursuing funding opportunities for construction and having a lot of conversations with our state partners on that. So more to come on that program. On the Thermalito Afterbay Boat Ramp and Campground project, we are very close to 100% design level. We're working with acquiring all our necessary permits so that we can be in construction next year. We're anticipating going out to bid on that project in October, hopefully opening bids in December, and then advancing towards a construction contract award next year and being in construction in 2026. So we're excited about that project. Also working very closely on our FEMA remapping for Sutter County. FEMA is looking to digitize all the maps for Sutter County and incorporating all our levee improvements into that process. So we continue to address any comments that we receive from FEMA and quickly turn those around to advance that process. And then the last two bullets on this slide, there's multiple side channel projects that are underway in either planning or design. The first one is by the Sutter County Resource Conservation District, and we're a partner in that process. We have a meeting set up later this month to look at alternatives that they've started to determine how to design these side channel improvements. And then further downstream from that project is the project being run by River Partners under a Bureau of Reclamation grant. So all of those side channel projects are sort of happening at the same time, and they will be coordinated with each other, and we'll be watching those very closely to ensure that whatever is being proposed is not detrimental to integrity of our levee system. Next slide, please. So this one, I brought up. I've been thinking about this. There's been a lot of activity going on nationally. There's been a lot of flooding throughout the country and life-threatening flooding and a lot of lives lost, specifically in Texas and New Mexico and on the East Coast. So there's a lot of changes that are occurring throughout the country, probably throughout the world. I don't want to say climate change or, the words the new administration doesn't want to hear, but there's changes that are occurring and nobody really knows why. I just want to be mindful of those. We had a very cool summer. July was unseasonably cool. It was great. But, from my perspective or the agency perspective, what does that mean for the winter? Could that potentially mean we have a wet winter? Could we have a dry winter? Nobody really knows, but, things are changing and we want to be very mindful of that fact. So I just wanted to throw that out there. I know during flood season, I had, we've talked about this every month. What does the weather look like? What does the snowpack look like? Keeping a very close eye on dam operations. And, Jenny's here today talking about water control manuals. And that's near and dear to all of our hearts and being mindful for safety of our public. So with that said, Sabufka is a part of the Central Valley Flood Control Association. And the association just wrote a letter to DWR to prioritize risk reduction funding, flood risk reduction funding. And we passed out those, I believe everybody has a copy of that letter. And it really highlights the fact that all of this flooding that's occurred nationally throughout this year on arc storm, forecasts, on the uncertainty of climate as we move forward into the future, and knowing that the state budget is not in a really good situation, and all of the federal budget cuts, we just wanted to go put the state on notice that we're concerned and we believe this should be a priority. So that letter was sent just earlier this week, and we'll stay on top of that. And we continue to work closely with DWR to prioritize funding for flood risk reduction. Also, lastly on this slide, FEMA uncertainty. We've heard talks about FEMA, the new administration wanting to eliminate FEMA. And what does that mean from a flood safety perspective or perspective throughout the country on storm damage and recovery from that? So we're concerned about that, and we're concerned about what does that mean from FEMA grant perspective. So we're keeping a close eye on that. But we, as I mentioned earlier, we're applying for the FEMA HMGP grant for our Sutter Bypass East Levee project, and we'll continue to look for other federal and state opportunities to advance our program. Next slide, please. So lastly, as I mentioned, we have a meeting with DWR focusing on the Sutter Bypass East Levee later this month. We partnered with Calpine on that. We're hoping to have a really meaningful discussion about advancing levee repairs of the Sutter Bypass. And we have our next board meeting in September. So with that said, Mr. Chairman, I'll turn it back to you and see if there's any questions.
Any questions for Mr. Brissett? All right, hearing none. Any comments from directors prior to us adjourning into closed session? All right. At this point, we'll be moving into closed session. I don't know if council wants to read the item or if I read the item. I guess it's me. Item number 5 for closed session, significant exposure to litigation, Odysseus Farms pursuant to Government Code Section 54956.9 D2. And we will now move into closed session. Thank you.